Okay, let's start the notes for 8.6. Yay, pull out your calculators and you can use your calculators for the rest of the course, which isn't very long. So get those out. Mine is sitting right here so I can use it as well. Okay, so let's talk about percents. We were estimating percents in 8.5, but we really didn't at that point talk about what a percent is. So what a percent basically means is a number out of 100. The number 100 is the number that all percents are based out of. So if I say 35%, what that means is really 35 out of 100. That's what 35% means. Always out of 100. So if we look at these first couple of examples, and please do not overthink these examples. They're all based on the fact that the percent is just a number out of 100. Last year, Candy spent 100 hours volunteering at the food bank center. This year, she spent 115 hours volunteering at the same place. Write the time she spent this year as a percent of last year. Well, she spent 115 this year out of 100 last year. And now remember what we said above, that a percent is just a number out of 100. So that means she spent 115% of the time this year that she did last year. 100% means the whole thing. So if she had spent 100 hours this year and they were equal, that would be 100%. It's like if you have a pizza and you look at the whole thing, 8 slices out of 8 slices, that's 100%. But in this case, she spent more. So if you're talking about more, your percent's going to be over 100. Look at number 2. And again, please don't overthink this. There are 100 milliliters of solution in a container. Jim takes 0.4 milliliters out of the solution. What percent of the solution did Jim take? Well, he took 0.4 milliliters out of the 100. And again, because percent just means a number out of 100, all that means is he took 0.4%. So again, that's just letting you know that a percent is a number out of 100. So now what we're going to do with percents on the next 2 pages is we're going to change percent form to decimal form, and then on page 2 we're also going to throw some fractions in there. So number 3 is going to be easy. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to change from a percent to a decimal and back. Oh, my little thing keeps coming undone here. All right, so if I want to change a decimal to a percent, all you do is you move the decimal point. It's always 2 places to the right. And then obviously you write the percent symbol at the end. If I want to change a percent to a decimal, you move it 2 places to the left and you get rid of your percent sign. So if we look at my chart here, I want to change this percent to a decimal. I simply move my decimal 2 places to the left and I get 0.051, and of course you don't write the percent sign. That's all there is to it. If I want to change 1.27, that's in decimal form, and I want to change it to a percent, now I move my decimal 2 places to the right. That's 127, and I add the percent sign. If I do this one, 0.015, move my decimal 2 places to the right. That is 1.5%. If I want to change 203% to a decimal, here's the decimal right now, and I move it 2 places to the left. So that would be 2.03, no percent sign. At some point, you can stop the video and fill in the rest of the chart on your own and then come back to it. If I go changing this decimal to a percent, move it 2 places to the right, that's 83%. Now, this is a percent. Even though it's also a decimal, as long as the percent sign is there, it's still a percent. So I still take wherever the decimal is, and I move it 2 places to the left. So that would be 0.002. And then this one, 0.325, it's a decimal. There's no percent sign, so it's a decimal. I move it 2 places to the right, and it would be 32.5%. So I hope you can agree that decimal to a percent is fairly simple. It's going to get a little more complicated as we go to number 4, because notice I've added another column. We have fractions, decimals, and percents. And by the way, it also says round to the nearest hundredth if necessary. So we'll talk about that in a minute. So we can do it in any order. I'm given this fraction 7 out of 100. So I could put that as a decimal next. Or, because it's out of 100, doesn't that mean that it's just 7%? Because remember, what is a percent? It is a number out of 100. So that's really simply 7%. And now how do I change this percent to a decimal? I move it over 2 places to the left. So that would be 0.07. Now remember, another way to change a fraction to a decimal is just read it correctly. This is 7/100ths, and you should know that 7/100ths looks like this as a decimal. So look at this one. I'm given the decimal. So why don't we go ahead and change that decimal to a percent by moving it over 2 places, the decimal over 2 places to the right. Now, if I want to change this decimal to a fraction, well, let's see. How would I read this correctly? It's really 35/100ths, and that would be the fraction. And then if I need to reduce that, if I divide both top and bottom by, 5, I would get 7/20. Only reduce if they make you reduce. All right, let's look at this one. Look at this one. I'm given a percent. So I'm going to go and change it to a decimal first. So I'm going to move it 2 places to the left. So that would be 0.015. And now I'm going to change this decimal to a fraction. Well, if I read this correctly, it's going to be 15. And what place is the 5 in? It's in the thousandths place. So it would be 15/1000. And I'm going to reduce it. So I'm going to divide both top and bottom by 5. So 15 divided by 5 is 3, and 1,000 divided by 5 is 200. Let's skip the next one just for a minute. We're going to come back to it, don't worry. But that one's probably the most difficult one of the whole thing. So let's go ahead and let's skip this one and let's go down to this guy. So if I want to change this to a percent, right now it's a decimal, I'm going to move it over 2 places to the right. So that would be 1.87%. And then if I want to change this decimal to a fraction, well, let's read it. It would be 187, and this 7 is in the 10,000ths place. So it would be 187/10,000. And that may reduce, but we're not going to reduce it at this point. All right. We have this 38%. Again, to change it to a decimal, we're going to move it 2 places to the left. So that would be 0.38. Then changing this decimal to a fraction, it would be 38/100ths because the 8 is in the hundredths place. And I can pretty easily simplify this because I know 2 divides into both 38 and 100. So 38 divided by 2 is 19, and 100 divided by 2 is 50. All right, so if we go to this one and we want to change it to either a percent or to a decimal, I want you to notice here that the bottom is a 200 as opposed to a 100. If it were a 100, then we would be talking about a problem like the first one on the top here. And if the bottom were a 100, then the top would be the actual percent. Because remember, a percent is a number out of 100. Well, what can I do to both top and bottom here that would make the bottom a 100? I can divide them both by 2. 110 divided by 2 is 55, and 200 divided by 2 is 100. So these are equivalent fractions. This one's just simplified a little bit. But now, since it's out of 100, or there's 100 on the bottom, I know that the percent is simply 55%, because a percent is a number out of 100. And then if I want to write this as a decimal, I would move it 2 places to the left, and I'm going to get 0.55. All right, now, number 5 is going to be a little bit stickier. Why? Because you're talking about some things that are repeating. So that's why it's going to be a little bit crazier, but that's okay. So first of all, if I want to change 6 over 11 to a decimal, now we can use our calculator. So hopefully you remember that to change a fraction to a decimal, you just simply divide the top by the bottom. So it'd be 6 divided by 11. And you can see that it's a repeating decimal. It's 0.545454 and so on. So I'm going to write that in my chart as 0.54 repeating. But I want you to remember that it's 0.5454. So now if I take that decimal and change it to a percent, I'm simply going to move the decimal over 2 places. So do you see where that would be 54.54 repeating percent? So it's 54.54 repeating percent. And again, remember that's because it's really 0.545454. And if I move my decimal over 2 places, then that would be 54, and then these would still repeat. So that's how I got that. So now, there are a couple of repeating decimals that you should know. And 0.3 repeating is one of them. So I need you to memorize this. We haven't memorized a lot lately, but you need to memorize this. 0.3 repeating is 1/3. Please just memorize that. So highlight it, whatever you need to do. So now if I change this decimal to a percent, I'm simply going to move it over 2 places to the right. So you can see that that's 33.3 repeating percent. Let's do this one. Now, it's a percent because this percent sign is here. So what I would suggest you do is change 2/5 into a decimal. So if you use your calculator and do 2 divided by 5, you can see that it's 0.4. So this is really 0.4%. We didn't change it from a percent. The percent sign is still there. If I now take this and move it over 2 places to the left, you can see my decimal would be 0.004. And then if I wanted to write that as a fraction, that would be 4 over, what place is the 4 in? It is in the thousandths place, which if you reduce it is 1 over 250. We're going to do another one of those in the last one. 2/9. So let's go ahead and let's change it to a decimal by using your calculator. If you do 2 divided by 9, you get 0.2 repeating. So The decimal would be 0.2 repeating. So if I look at 0.2222, and if I move to change the percent, I need to change it to a percent, I need to move it 2 places to the right. So you can see that's going to be 22.2 repeating percent. Let's look at 0.1 repeating. So again, if I move the decimal 2 places to the right, that's going to be 11.1%, and the 1 is going to be repeating. Here's another one that I want you to memorize. 0.1 repeating is 1/9. So let me show you something over here. So 0.1 repeating is 1/9. We looked at 0.2 repeating. That's 2/9. What is 0.3 repeating? Well, follow the pattern. That's 3/9, which reduces to 1/3, and we looked at that here. What do you think 0.4 repeating is? Take a wild guess. It's 4/9. This will make it easier for you to memorize. 0.5 repeating is 5/9. 0.6 repeating is 6/9, but 6/9 reduces to 2/3 because I can divide top and bottom by 3. 0.7 repeating is 7/9. 0.8 repeating is 8/9. So this will help you memorize those. All right, our last example here. Now this one is very similar to this one over here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just take 3/4 and change it to a decimal. Hopefully you know that 3/4 is 0.75, but if you don't, you can use your calculator. So this is 0.75%. Again, I just changed the 3/4 to a decimal. I didn't move a decimal anywhere, so it's still a percent. Now, if I take this and change it to a decimal, I would have to move it 2 places to the left, which would give me 0.0075. And then now to write that as a fraction, that would be 75 over tenths, hundredths, thousandths. That's in the 10,000ths place. And we're not going to take the time to reduce that. So there you go. There is section 8.6.